For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. In this special series on 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, we are talking to different observers of China, observers of the growth of the Chinese Communist Party, and of course those who have served in China in various capacities. And a special guest today is Vijay Gokhale, former Foreign Secretary, Indian Foreign Service officer, who has lived in China at various stages of his career and was India's Foreign Secretary from 2018 to 2020. Welcome to this program, Ambassador Gokhale. In fact, I think your latest book also talks about the Chinese Communist Party's difficult phase in 1989-1990. And I think you are somebody who very well qualified to speak about it.
Thank you for having me on the show, Nitin.
Yes, in fact, let me start with some fundamental questions that our viewers have been asking us at various stages. While there is a feeling or there is the awareness among some people that the Chinese Communist Party is all pervasive, and each Chinese citizen is supposed to be a member of the party. Is that true, or is it something that is a myth?
Nitin, let me begin by saying that the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party is a big deal for China. 100 years ago, this was a party which was started by 12 or 15 people in a small room. And it has grown from those 12 or 15 people to a party which now, at least according to the Chinese Communist Party figures, numbers over 100 million and is therefore supposedly the largest political party in the world. This growth has been spectacular, and for that purpose, when it begins its second century, it begins it not as an outlawed party in a small room, but as the ruling party of the most populous nation on earth, and certainly the second most powerful nation on earth as well. Now, as far as membership is concerned, it is limited to certain criteria. But if you go by population statistics, it is still 1 out of every 14 Chinese men and women who are members of the party. What has happened lately, however, is an effort by President Xi Jinping to control the membership in order to ensure that it does not lead to any dilution of the core ideology of the party. One of the developments that happened post-1989 was an effort by the party to bring in disparate sections of society which would normally not have been eligible for membership. The business community, for one, the relatively centrist-leaning academics for another, minorities for a third. All these were incorporated within the party. Party membership was open to them, and the size of the party mushroomed. But the feeling that the leadership currently has is that the mushrooming has led to a dilution. And therefore, there is an effort to ensure a tighter membership. Nonetheless, it is, for all practical purposes, supposedly the largest political party in the world.
Oh, indeed it is. But it also is a all-powerful party which maybe takes precedence over the government itself. And it is only, perhaps the only party in the world which has its presence, official presence in the military itself. That itself is a very unique kind of arrangement that the Chinese have. Can you elaborate a bit on that? How does the PLA incorporate the party's ideology, and how do they cross-function with the military leaders?
So very early on in the history of the Communist Party, sometime in 1928 or 1929, that is within maybe just 6 or 8 years after the founding of the party, a conference was held in Kutian. It is known as the Kutian Conference. And Mao Zedong dictated his famous resolution which said that the military must be subservient to the party. It must serve the party's political interest. So Mao and the early leaders all recognized that if the communist revolution in China was to succeed, it would be through armed struggle. Remember, India was at that stage advocating non-violence and ahimsa as a means of gaining independence.
Yes.
And they also realized that if it was to be an armed struggle, unless a civilian control was maintained, armies tended to get politicized over time. Therefore, Mao and his successors have always tried to ensure that the PLA remains under the control of the party. And this message was reinforced by Deng Xiaoping after the 1989 Tiananmen incident and is being reinforced now by President Xi Jinping since 2014 or 2015. There is always the underlying concern that the army, with its armed capabilities, might at some stage overthrow individual leaders, if not the party itself. And therefore, there is always this constant refrain that the army is the party's army and not the Chinese army. And for that reason, it is perhaps the only army in the world which is not called a Chinese national army. It is still called the People's Liberation Army.
Indeed.
And I think this is important.
Yes, it is important to note. And also, if you've, I'm sure you have noticed, but even somebody like me who doesn't watch China so closely has noticed that Xi Jinping keeps reiterating that the loyalty of the PLA should be to the party and it should adhere to the principles of the party a number of times. Twice he has done when he's gone back from India and reiterated. I think it's an annual message that he gives since 2014. But let me take you back to your first response to where the Chinese Communist Party stands. After 1889, there was, as you said, a mushroom growth of the party itself, but it also created, and I was reading some recent very good articles on the CCP's 100 years, which I'm sure you have also read, where they talk about ideological, organizational, and structural problems that creeped into the party. Now, Xi Jinping, I think, came in and tried to correct that, as you rightly mentioned. But having got used to the luxury and the prosperity and the growth, will the current membership of the party actually reconcile to the going back to the purity of ideology? Is there a struggle somewhere within the party on that count? Do you see that happening?
I don't think President Xi Jinping is advocating a return to the chaos of the Maoist period or of the frugality of the Maoist period. The chaos of the Maoist period, even the current leadership admits, was a serious failure on the part of the Communist Party. And the frugality of the previous leadership is no longer possible because China's per capita income as well as GDP are multiple times of what they were in the 1950s and 60s. Essentially, what Xi Jinping is saying is that the party members, while enjoying all the perquisites and privileges of office, need to remain true to the basic doctrine of preserving the supremacy of the Communist Party in China. And, if necessary, sacrificing other interests, political, personal, or any other interests, to preserving the party's interest if and when push comes to shove. Now, that, of course, I do concede is easier said than done because, as you said, in the intervening 20 or 25 years, people have grown used to not only being rich, but also having a certain independence of thought and action. So what President Xi Jinping is trying to do is to bring ideology, at least notionally, back into the party by saying that in future, promotions will not just depend upon competence or professionalism. It will also depend upon your ideological bent of mind, on how red you are, on whether you have inherited the red genes that were supposedly passed on by the early leaders of the Communist Party. Therefore, in a sense, avenues to promotion, and this applies across the board from politics to business to culture, will be not merely because you are very competent, but also because you are loyal. And perhaps loyalty might even trump confidence in this regard. I think that is the crux of Xi Jinping's message.
So, taking the example of what happened to Jack Ma, What would be your best guess? On this? Was the loyalty in question, or was his ideological purity in question?
I have a slightly different take on Jack Ma, Nitin.
Okay.
No doubt some of it was out of concern that large Chinese conglomerates with billions of dollars might have the financial capability to finance a political change. That is a concern that we have also seen in Putin's Russia. But
Right.
my take on Jack Ma was a little different. I think the primary concern here was that private payment platforms were beginning to replace Chinese controlled banks as the principal means of financing the public interest. In other words, companies like Tencent or Ant Financial or Paytm were not just platforms to buy and sell, they were platforms to borrow, platforms to get loans from, platforms to bank your money in. And therefore, they became the place where you went to bank money rather than the commercial banks. Now, the commercial banks are the means through which any state, whether it is democratic or authoritarian, controls the fiscal and financial system of a country. If you allow private players to get predominant in that, you eventually may lose financial control. This is also the concern with digital currency where China is concerned. So my take on this, Nitin, and I may be wrong, is that the fall of Jack Ma was perhaps partly motivated by political reasons, but partly also motivated by financial reasons. And we need to go into a little depth to understand whether there was any basis in their financial concern that Paytm or Alibaba or Tencent was becoming an alternative for the formal banking system in China.
Yeah, it's a very refreshing and very different take indeed, and you could be absolutely right on that. But looking ahead now in the second century of the Chinese Communist Party, there is also this ideological battle with the world's functioning democracies. I think the Chinese are hell-bent on, at least Xi Jinping is hell-bent on probably trying to prove that the messy democracies are no match to the orderly kind of system that the Chinese have under the Chinese Communist Party. Would that be his primary motivation to do what he's doing across the globe, being aggressive, or is it to preserve his own position? And I think his renewal is coming up next year. So how would he deal with the party, and what would be the party's future?
Let me put it this way, Nitin. I think that his own position currently appears to be secure. And unless we are missing something very large in terms of dissidence within the party, I think that the instruments of power that he has are such that he should be able to manage any dissidence within the party so long as the economy continues to grow and China's national honor and dignity abroad are upheld. As far as the international goals of the party are concerned, I think they remain primarily a desire to vindicate their belief that the Communist Party of China is the only political force in the country which can guarantee the Chinese their proper place in life. Remember that it is not just the communists, but even the governments before the communists who always talked of China as being the center of the world and as the world's largest economy for centuries. So restoration of that status quo ante, as it were, is what is the goal of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, of course, the one element that we ought to be watching carefully is whether in the pursuit of those interests, China goes beyond simply the usual economic, military, and other means and involves itself in bringing political change in other countries. In other words, as the erstwhile Soviet Union did, will there be an attempt by China to induce communism or socialism or to support authoritarianism in countries across the broad swathe of what is called the third world now, Asia, Africa, and Latin America? Now, there is still a debate on this. The United States and the West, of course, have thrown down the ideological gauntlet. So there is going to be much more of ideology now in foreign policy, including in China's foreign policy, than there was. But I think the jury is still out on whether China is going to play politics in a manner in which it influences political situations within countries in its favor. And I believe that one of the key countries to look out for is Nepal. Here is a country where, for the first time, the Chinese have midwifed the Communist Party, and where the recent actions suggest that they are taking concrete, positive, affirmative action to keep that party in power. So this is one example, but I am sure there are other people, other academics, experts, intellectuals who will give you other examples where China is not doing it, which is why I say the jury is out.
Yeah, it's very, very well put. One final question. In your book describing the situation around the Tiananmen incident and that time the struggle, inner party struggle in the Chinese Communist Party, you have vividly painted the picture of the political struggle in the factions or the factionalism within the Chinese Communist Party. Do you think that has now completely vanished, or it will continue to exist no matter how powerful the General Secretary is or the President is?
So history has shown that no Chinese leader, no Chinese communist leader, that is, has been able to totally stamp out dissidence and factionalism within his party. But history has also shown that powerful leaders like Mao and Deng and now Xi are able to manage those contradictions substantially and therefore ensure their predominant role. So my own sense is that Xi Jinping probably understands that there are people within the party who don't necessarily support him, and like Mao, uses certain instruments of state to ensure that they are brought under control. And in the current situation where digital technology has taken us closer to George Orwell's 1984 and Big Brother than anything in the past, perhaps the instruments of control are much stronger. Nevertheless, we do know that despite all these instruments of control, other authoritarian regimes the world over, and for that matter, even democratic governments which adopt authoritarian means, such as Nixon, for instance, in the United States, have fallen by the wayside, because control ultimately, when challenged by mass movement, rarely is able to manage the situation.
I think so, but it is a party to watch in its second century of existence, I guess, given the fact that it is, like you said, the second most powerful country in the world. And by 2049, they have the aim to become the number one preeminent power in the world. So I think the Chinese Communist Party will continue to play a role not only domestically but also internationally. I think on that note, let me thank you for your time and your insights. As usual, brilliant and very, very useful for our viewers. And also see to it that we have other discussions on the Chinese Communist Party and its 100 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.